We're going to focus on the last few events that finally brought the North and the South to the war or to war. So we go to December of 1860. The Southern states begin to secede. They began to do this because of Abraham Lincoln. They view him as an abolitionist who's going to take away slavery, so they secede. Definition for secede means to withdraw or leave an alliance or organization. I think you guys know this, but just in case, secede, when we say the South left the country, this isn't physical movement. The Southerners didn't pack up their stuff and move. What they're saying is our states are no longer a part of the United States. They're withdrawing. South Carolina was the first to go. 6 other states will leave quickly also. I'll show this to you guys on the map in just a second. And we'll see also on the map, not all of the southern states will leave right away. So they've left. So what do they do now? Well, the next step is they form their own country. And this happened in February 1861. 7 southern states form the Confederate States of America. So we now have 2 separate countries, the United States and the Confederate States. And the Confederate States set up government. They had Congress, they had elections, they had a president, they had a vice president. They set up their own currency. They began passing their own laws, forming their own military. So they're operating like a separate country. Then in March, when Lincoln was inaugurated, he gives a speech. He warns the South not to be violent. Doesn't say anything about slavery because his goal is to keep the country together. And if he says, well, I'm going to ban slavery, even though Lincoln wants to, that's not going to get these 7 states back into the United States. So here's the map showing it, what happened. And let's start at the bottom. These states down here, these were the 7 that initially left and formed the CSA. And it has all their dates on that. Then these states, there are 4 of them. They eventually joined the CSA, but it took them a little bit longer. May, June, May, April. So they'll join the CSA, but not initially. And then what we have in between, we have this division. This is the division between North and South. And with the North, we have what were called border states. We'll talk about them next unit, but they were a part of the North also. All right, last event that draws us to war. Fort Sumter, April 1861. So Fort Sumter was an American fort located in South Carolina. We have to remember is that South Carolina is now a part of the CSA. So you have an American military fort located in a foreign country. And this is when it starts to get a little bit strange. The modern day equivalent would be if we had a military fort in Russia or North Korea. That would be odd. Well, South Carolina, they decide they're going to surround this fort and attempt to starve it out. They start a siege. A siege is when it's similar to a blockade, if you've heard that word before. You surround a fort or a town and you don't let anything in or out. So if your siege is successful, one of 2 things will happen. Number 1, the people inside, in this case the fort, will starve to death. Most likely before they do that, they'll surrender. So it's a way to take over something that doesn't mean like physically attacking them. So Lincoln now he has issues because as president he has to protect the American soldiers and he has to protect the fort. That's part of his duty as being president. So he sends out an announcement saying he's going to send in food and supplies. He never mentions troops because if he says I'm going to send troops in, that looks a little bit more aggressive and he wants to avoid any sort of conflict or war. Shortly after the announcement, the South attacks the fort. They take over the fort. They force the American soldiers into surrendering. I don't believe anyone died. But now Lincoln, he has no choice. An American military fort has been attacked by a foreign country. So Lincoln declares war on the South and the Civil War begins. Final thing we need to look at. Oh, there's Fort Sumter. You can see it's not all that big of a fort. It's surrounded by water on 3 sides. So to surround this wouldn't, especially if you have boats out here, wouldn't be all that difficult to do. Final topic is the long-term causes of the Civil War. So to this point, we've looked at events that have led up to the Civil War. These are the things that had been building years and years and years that ultimately caused the Civil War. Number one, have to start with slavery. This was the big issue between the North and the South. There's no real debate over that. The second one, this is a new term, states' rights. States' rights is the belief that the state government should have more power than the national government. So today, do you believe that the state of Kansas should have more influence and power over your life, or do you think it should be the national government in Washington, D.C.? People still debate this today. Back then, the South were firm believers in states' rights. They thought it was up to the individual state to decide issues such as slavery. Where they got really mad was when people in New York or Pennsylvania or these other northern states were telling them, you can't have slaves. They believed that an individual state should decide on their own if they wanted slaves or not. Last one I put up here is sectionalism. This was a word on our very first assignment for the unit. Sectionalism is loyalty to one's region rather than to the country as a whole. So if you went down to Virginia and you asked a person from Virginia, what are you? Their first response is not going to be an American. They're either going to say Southern or they might even say they were a Virginian. They were more loyal to their state.